Your bank charges you 40% interest for borrowing £50. This is not a payday loan. It is a standard overdraft from a high street bank in 2024. And weirdly, that 40% number is both accurate and deeply misleading. Here is the strange part. Back in 2020, the regulator completely overhauled how overdraft fees work. They said the new rules would make everything clearer and fairer for customers. 4 years later, complaints about overdraft charges have gone up, not down. And when you look at how the new system actually works, you start to understand why. The old fees were confusing. The new fees are confusing in a different way. And the difference between those two types of confusion is costing millions of people money. They do not need to spend. Let me explain how overdrafts used to work, because you need to understand the old system before the new one makes any sense. Before April 2020, banks charged overdrafts in 3 different ways, often all at once. You would have a daily fee, typically £1 or £2 for every day you were overdrawn. On top of that, you would have interest on the amount you had borrowed. And then, if you went over your agreed limit, you would get hit with an additional charge, sometimes £5 or £10 per transaction. So imagine you are £200 overdrawn for 2 weeks. You might pay £28 in daily fees, plus £3 or £4 in interest, plus another £30 if you accidentally exceeded your limit at any point. The total cost was a patchwork that even bank staff struggled to explain, which is partly why overdraft complaints consistently ranked among the most common issues reported to the Financial Ombudsman. The Financial Conduct Authority, the regulator that oversees banks, looked at this system and said it was not working. Their research found that 50% of firms' overdraft revenue came from unarranged overdrafts, even though only a small fraction of customers ever used them. The people paying the most were often the ones who could least afford it. In 2019, the Financial Conduct Authority announced reforms that would force banks to drop all those extra fees and charge one single rate of interest instead. Simple and transparent, they called it. The changes came into effect in April 2020, right as the pandemic hit, which meant most people had bigger things to worry about than reading the small print on their bank accounts. Here is what actually happened. Banks took their complicated fee structures and worked out what they were making per customer on average. Then they set their new interest rate to match that revenue. Nationwide, HSBC, Lloyds, Barclays, and most of the major banks landed somewhere between 35% and 40% annual percentage rate. To put that in perspective, the average credit card interest rate in the United Kingdom is around 23%. A typical personal loan from a high street bank runs between 7% and 15%. Your mortgage is probably somewhere between 4% and 6%. Yet your own bank, the one that already has your salary landing in your current account every month, charges you 40% to borrow from yourself. The Financial Conduct Authority knew this would happen. Their own analysis predicted that around 30% of overdraft users would see higher costs under the new system. But they argued the trade-off was worth it, that a simpler structure would make comparison easier, and that the removal of unarranged fees would protect the most vulnerable borrowers from the worst penalty charges. Except people don't understand what they're being charged, and that's where the real confusion starts. The new system uses something called APR, annual percentage rate. If you have ever applied for a credit card or a loan, you have seen this number. It is supposed to tell you the true cost of borrowing over a year, but overdrafts do not work like loans. Most people do not borrow from their overdraft for an entire year. They dip in for a few days when things are tight, then pay it back when their wages come in. Using an annual rate to describe a short-term borrowing product is like measuring your commute in nautical miles. Technically accurate, practically useless. Here is a real example. You are £100 overdrawn for 10 days at 40% APR. How much does that actually cost you? Most people would struggle to answer that without a calculator. That is because APR was designed as a compliance metric for comparing loans, not as a way to understand what short-term borrowing actually costs you day to day. The answer is roughly £1.10. That is not nothing, but it is also not the catastrophic sum that 40% interest implies when you first hear it. Let me give you another one. You are £500 overdrawn for an entire month at 40% APR. That costs you about £16.40 in interest. Under the old system with £1 daily fees, the same borrowing would have cost you £30 or £31. So for heavier, longer overdraft use, the new system genuinely is cheaper. But flip it around. You are £50 overdrawn for 3 days while waiting for payday. At 40% APR, that costs you about 16 pence. Under the old system with a £6 monthly fee structure that some banks used, you might have paid nothing if you stayed under a buffer threshold, or the same £6 regardless of whether you were overdrawn for 3 days or 3 weeks. Now here is the twist. Under the old system, that same £100 overdraft for 10 days might have cost you £10 or £15 in daily fees. So some people are genuinely paying less than they used to, but they do not feel like they are paying less because 40% sounds terrifying, and other people are paying significantly more. If you used to have a small agreed overdraft and only occasionally went over by £50 for a day or two, the old daily fees might have been £2 or £3. Now you are being charged interest on the entire amount from day one, which for small, short borrowing can work out more expensive. The problem isn't that the maths is hard. The problem is that banks have no incentive to help you do the maths. Your banking app will tell you your overdraft interest rate, buried somewhere in the terms and conditions. But it will not show you a simple pounds and pence calculation of what today's overdraft is actually costing you. The FCA specifically asked banks to show interest charges in pounds, not just percentages. And some do, sort of, but the way they display it varies enormously. Some banks show you an estimated monthly charge, some show you accrued interest to date, some just show the annual percentage rate and leave you to figure out the rest. When which? Surveyed overdraft users in 2022, only 37% said they found it easy to understand what their overdraft was costing them. That is after 2 years of the supposedly simpler system. This is where it gets properly complicated. Under the old system, going over your agreed overdraft limit came with heavy penalty fees. £10 here, £15 there, adding up fast. The new rules banned those fees entirely. Banks cannot charge you extra for unauthorized borrowing anymore. Sounds like a win, right? It was supposed to protect people who are already struggling. But banks found a workaround. They simply started refusing unauthorized overdrafts altogether. Before 2020, if you tried to make a £30 payment that would push you over your limit, many banks would let it go through and charge you a fee. Now they just decline the payment. That might seem more responsible. But think about what happens when a payment gets declined. If it is a direct debit for your phone bill, you might get a late payment fee from the phone company. If it is your rent or a loan repayment, it could affect your credit score. If it is at a supermarket checkout with a queue behind you, the embarrassment costs something too, even if it is not measured in pounds. There is a specific scenario that catches people out. Your account is £10 in credit. A £50 direct debit goes out. You had a £100 arranged overdraft, so you would expect that to be fine, and it is. But then a second payment comes through for £70. That would take you to £30 over your limit. Under the old rules, many banks would let it go and charge you a fee. Now, it gets bounced. That second payment might be your energy bill, your council tax, or your car insurance. The knock-on effects of a bounced payment often cost more than the old overdraft fee would have. Think about someone on a tight budget who has timed everything carefully. They know their rent goes out on the 1st, their energy on the 5th, their phone on the 10th. They've done this for years. 1 month, an unexpected expense lands, and their overdraft buffer is not quite enough. Under the old system, the bank would have let the payment through and charged them £8. Under the new system, their energy direct debit bounces. They get a late payment fee from their supplier, and their credit file takes a hit. That's the trade-off nobody explained to them. The FCA estimated that payment declines would increase under the new rules. And they have. Citizens Advice reported a 25% rise in payment bounce complaints in the years following the reform. Some banks offer a small buffer, maybe £10 or £20, that they will cover without declining the payment, even if you have exceeded your formal limit. But this varies wildly between providers, and most people do not know whether their bank does this until they find out the hard way. If you have made it this far, here is the question that matters. Which side of this change are you on? The new overdraft rules created clear winners and clear losers. If you regularly use a large overdraft for extended periods, you are probably paying less than before. Someone who stays £1,000 overdrawn for most of the month used to face daily fees that could easily reach £30 or £40 every month. Now they are paying interest that might work out to £12 or £15. That is a significant saving. If you occasionally dip into a small overdraft for a few days at a time, you are probably paying more. The daily fee model was expensive for heavy users, but relatively gentle on light users. The interest model treats everyone the same, which sounds fair until you realize it hits occasional borrowers harder. If you used to occasionally go over your limit and absorb the fees, you have lost that safety net entirely. Now you get declined instead. For people living paycheck to paycheck, that flexibility mattered more than the cost. There is one more group worth mentioning. People who never use their overdraft at all are completely unaffected by any of this, but they are also subsidizing the system in a way that is easy to miss. Banks do not make much money from customers who keep healthy balances and never borrow. The overdraft revenue helps pay for free banking, for the branch networks, for the apps, and for customer service. When regulators squeeze overdraft profits, banks do not just absorb the loss. They look for other revenue streams, packaged accounts with monthly fees, reduced interest on savings, charges for services that used to be free. The first thing worth checking is whether you are using your overdraft without realizing it. Your bank should send you alerts when you enter your overdraft, but these notifications are easy to miss, especially if they are buried in your app. Go into your settings and make sure you have text alerts switched on for when your balance drops below zero. Some banks let you set custom thresholds too. Log into your banking app and look at your overdraft settings. Find out your current limit and your interest rate. If you are being charged 39.9% and you have been overdrawn for most of the last month, work out what that is actually costing you in pounds. Multiply your average overdrawn amount by 0.4, then divide by 12, and that is roughly your monthly interest. A £500 average overdraft is costing you about £16 a month, or nearly £200 a year. Once you know the actual cost, you can decide whether it is worth doing something about. A credit card used sensibly costs less than an overdraft. If you can get approved for even a basic card at 20-something% and you use it to cover short-term gaps instead of your overdraft, you will pay lower interest. But this only works if you actually pay it off when you can. Credit card debt spirals faster than overdraft debt if you let it build, and minimum payments are designed to keep you in debt for years. If you are not confident about your spending discipline, this might make things worse rather than better. Some banks offer lower overdraft rates than others. First Direct, for example, charges 39.9%, but only above an initial interest-free buffer. Starling Bank's overdraft is also around 35%, lower than most high street options. Switching current accounts is easier than most people think, and the current account switch service guarantees your direct debits and standing orders move automatically within 7 working days. If you are regularly using your overdraft and cannot seem to break the cycle, it might be worth talking to your bank about a formal repayment plan or exploring whether a personal loan at 10% or 15% would let you clear the overdraft and pay less overall. Banks are supposed to treat customers in financial difficulty fairly. Sometimes you just have to ask. The thing about overdraft fees is that they were confusing before and they are confusing now, just in a different direction. The old system hid the total cost in multiple fees. The new system expresses everything as a percentage that does not match how people actually use the product. Neither system was designed with you in mind. Both were designed around what banks can get away with within the rules, while still turning a profit. Here's what I want to know. Have you noticed your overdraft costs go up or down since 2020? And does your bank actually show you in pounds what you are being charged each month, or do you have to work it out yourself? Put your bank and your experience in the comments, because I think if we compare notes, we will see which banks are making this genuinely clearer and which are hiding behind the complexity. If this made you think differently about your overdraft, subscribe, because there is a lot more about banking charges that nobody explains properly.